Need to get a motion to go into 28th special session, please.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion before we go into special session? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 4-0. First item is the approval of purchase battalion vehicle McCafferty 4, Mechanicsburg, PA for $62,601.87.
Mr. Mayor, I move for mayor and council approval of the purchase of an 2017 F-250 extended cab pickup truck from McCafferty Ford in the amount of $62,601.87. This purchase accelerates replacement of a needed vehicle projected for FY19 with a one-time discount opportunity of $970.98. The purchase is funded by the sale of 2 used ladder trucks.
Second.
I'll give that one to Lou. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries 4-0. Approval of open containers exemption for Chris Kindle Market.
Mr. Mayor, I hereby move that the mayor and council approve an exemption from the City of Hagerstown's open containers regulation under section 173-6 of the Code of the City of Hagerstown for the Chris Kindle Market on December 2nd, 2017.
Second.
Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 4-0. Approval of fund balance retained earnings policy.
Mr. Mayor, I hereby move for mayor and council approval of the attached amended general fund balance retained earnings policy to provide guidance during the preparation and execution of the annual budget to ensure that sufficient reserves are maintained for future sustainability. This amendment updates the policy approved in 1993.
Second.
Discussion?
Couple things here. I think some of this we might be getting a little ahead of ourselves on a few things here. We heard some information in regards to stormwater management last week about the viability of that, maybe not even for a couple more years. We've yet to see any information about potential revenue sources, tax structures, cost savings, things of that nature for the upcoming fiscal year budget. I'll make a motion to table this for the time being until we can explore those avenues to actually realize what we may or may not need going forward.
Is your thought process that perhaps 17% is too high of a cap?
I think if Paul feels like I do, I don't know if 17% is the correct cap or not right this very minute. Which is why I know what Michelle's going to say, and I know we're talking about best practices. I understand all that, okay? I also know that we haven't explored any of the options that we talked about 4 months ago, and I believe that we need to do that before we adopt a policy when it comes to the general fund reserve fund balance.
Can I inquire as to what in real dollars 17% means today?
We do need a second before all this
I
discussion.
thought there was a second.
There was no second on the motion to
table.
table.
Oh, for table, yeah, no.
Oh,
Okay, so we'll leave it on the discussion, and then we'll come back if Mr. Corman wants to make that proposal again. Michelle?
Hello. So we were here a couple months ago with this item, and at the time, this body felt that we should wait until the end of the fiscal year 17 CAFR when we receive those results. We have since October 31st, our CAFR and our audit was completed. The CAFRs have been available on our website since October 31. The actual copies, the hard copies for distribution were placed in the box after it was printed. Earlier today, at the request of the mayor, I updated a chart to provide some information on where we are at the end of fiscal year 17 in total dollars in unassigned general fund balance and the percentage that represents to the general fund operating expenses, as well as the number of months that represents. And then I updated and included the amount that we would have available in our fiscal year 18 approved budget if everything falls into line as what we originally anticipated and approved. So to be fair to say, from this point right now, what dollar amount it would take to get us to 17% is hard to estimate because we're going to assume that fiscal year 18 approved budget numbers come in exactly as what was approved.
And I have somewhat of an answer. I looked at the sheet, I didn't notice the percentage, which is 18.9 now, and that gives me enough of an answer of what I need to know.
But does that 18.9, that 7.9 million, does that represent that we're going to use 200,000 this year?
Over $1 million. So, for our actual fiscal year 17, where we ended June 30 of 2017, the general fund unassigned fund balance was $9.5 million, which was 23.8% of our total operating expenses, or 2.9 months. But in our adopted and approved budget, we have a little over, it's approximately 1.1 million that we were going to use for general fund balance reserves for capital improvement projects. And so by utilizing it and where we also planned and incorporated other expenditures, our general fund unassigned fund balance would be about 7.9 million, which takes us to 18.9% of operating expenses in 2.3 months. So if we have a really great fiscal year 18 and revenues, surpass what we anticipated, that's wonderful. But in fiscal year 17, I just want to note that we actually lost $95,000 in the general fund.
I don't want my, my questions this morning to you to be misunderstood. I don't not agree with the 17%, just so you know, okay? My apprehension is that, at least currently anyway, the economy is taking a better for the turn. Even here in Washington County, we've seen that in increased home sales outside of the city of Hagerstown and things like that. And I'm hoping that trend continues, especially in the city of Hagerstown in the next couple of years anyway, until we see another recession, as was pointed out by Audubon Basu on Wednesday night, which will be a small recession compared to what we had in 2008, 2009. But I believe that until we can, and don't get me wrong, again, 17% I think is definitely fair, all right? I just don't know that that's the number that we settle on tonight, as opposed to that we settle on in April before we even adopt our budget, after we've looked at other revenue enhancements and how that will affect our budget for fiscal year 19. That's the only thing, that's the only reason I'm questioning this policy tonight,
And Mayor, my answer would be twofold. One, for all those who think that raising tax rates are fiscally irresponsible, I respect that position. There's another position that says relying on your general reserve fund to maintain your balance is fiscally irresponsible, okay? And I respect that position. And when I look at this here, it seems real clear what so far this administration has opted to do. And I can't imagine why, without an emergency, we would go below 17%. Let us all keep in mind that anything this body does, this body can undo. And just to say we haven't done our budget yet, so we shouldn't make it 17%, is an implication immediately that we're willing to draw down again to take it below 17% for this fiscal year. I mean, we were at fiscal year 16, fiscal year 17, 23.8%. And this only goes back to 14, but I suspect you could go back 20 years and find those kinds of percentages. And now we've gone from $9.5 million to $8 million, going from 23.8 to 18.9, and now we're talking about, oh geez, maybe we can take it below 17 now. And I, for one, find that totally fiscally irresponsible. If we need to take it below 17, it's because we're in some type of an emergency situation. And if that happens, we can amend this policy the same way we make this policy.
And examples that you're using, and then blaming the fact that we didn't increase taxes to cover those expenses were, as it was pointed out, capital improvement projects that, could have been postponed, but weren't. So, there's, and it's not just an emergency that could crop up, that would make us do that. It could be a project, that could, have implications of increasing our assessable base that could crop up, that we would need to delve in and be a partner to.
And if that's the case, then we should look at whether we need to amend the policy at that time. But otherwise, again, when I hear the discussion that we should wait until the budget, it scares me into thinking that we're going to rely on this. Now, I know we got some major things to go cooking. Nobody's discussed how we're going to meet the request from the Maryland Theater or some of our other projects. I understand that. And the time may come when we look at this policy and say we need to amend it. And if that's the case, just like with everything else, that's what we'll do. But I just find it difficult. One thing I will agree with you, we should either not vote on it or we should adopt it. But we shouldn't adopt a policy that's below 17%. That doesn't make sense. It makes sense to make an exception if we need to. But if we're looking at our bond rating and everything else, we shouldn't have a policy that says we go below best practices.
That does affect bond rating, correct?
I'm sorry, said
That
that.
does affect bond rating.
It
They
can.
actually very much discussed
It
our
was
fund
very-
balance
very high on
policy
the
and our
policy.
fund balance percentages with us when we last talked.
I would like to just make one note that we did put some language in here to allow, because the initial policy was just very short. And we did add language in here to allow for falling below the minimum and those sort of ideas. And I think that from a staff perspective, or at least from Michelle and my perspective, we were hoping to have this guidance passed tonight so that when we are building budget, because I have to build it first, and when we are building budget, we had some guidance, at least in regard to the fund balance.
See, and my concern with this is, and I don't disagree with anything that Lou has said here, is making it policy. I think it's great if we want to have that as a internal goal, if you want to have it as a departmental goal, things of that nature, but is there a policy with a specific number, as 10% is that policy right now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, again, why do we need to increase it when we don't even know what's going to happen in the future? I think we're getting ahead of ourselves, and we're putting ourselves in a corner now that this will be the way it is, regardless of what happens with anything else. And I'm not by any means suggesting or looking to go down the road of borrowing against the reserves to balance the budget or anything of that nature. Because by all means, once we get to that, one way or another, this body will still be able to vote whether they agree that, funds should be transferred from the fund balance or not. I just think we have, as Lou said, we have a lot of things on our plate in front of us that we're making a decision here without even getting to these other things that may or may not, affect what we can and cannot do. So I agree with what you said. I just don't think that we should, if we don't want to make it, just don't adopt it at all at this point.
And from a staff perspective, we approached it a couple months ago. There was no real conversation or discussion on anything within the language and the policy that anybody wanted to amend or change, but simply request that we wait to see how we ended the year in fiscal year 17. And so I'm sitting here, and it's the middle of November, and the rest of my November is going to be spent in starting to prepare for budget, and in December, our departmental management team is going to be building their budget request. I was hoping that I would have at least one concrete, clear goal and path in mind that I could help them stay focused on as we moved forward in the next month or so.
I think it's important to remember a couple of things. The first is the basic difference between an ordinance, a resolution, and a policy. This is a policy. It's not an ordinance that takes, 2 months of deliberation and hearings to change. It's a policy. It's not a resolution that requires official enactment, the way resolutions do. It's a policy decision, and the second is, and I think I said this at that time, to me, the percent isn't as important as the duration. It's never been, in my practice with the small town that I manage, it's more important to be able to have that, the duration, and you have 2 months here, which I still contend should be 3 months at minimum, and 6 months preferable, in a good, solid financial position. But the city's a much larger financial beast, with a lot more complexities. So, I agree. I think 17% is a fine number. I think it's a little low as far as percentages go. From ones that I've reviewed just in our enactment in the past year in my other place of employment. So the only thing I would even recommend changing here is that the 2-month mentions here, both on the general fund and the enterprise fund side, get bumped up to 3 months, because I think that that's a more crucial number, because government doesn't function the way that your average household does, or that private business even does, because you don't get that static flow of income. You get large chunks in sporadic periods.
Correct.
Not always at the same time, not always in the same framework, and your projects aren't as linear either. And so that's why I'm a bit more inclined toward the month issue than I am the percentage issue, because, the whole point of this policy is you have enough funding to cover those sporadic moments throughout your fiscal year. So I'm fine with the policy as is. If I had to table it for another day and lobby for it, I'd still be fine with the 17. Wouldn't think it's enough, frankly, and wouldn't care so much what the percentage is as opposed or as compared to the months.
Anybody else? Hey, Paul, you want to make your motion again to table and see if you get a second?
I'm sorry?
You want to make your motion to table again and see if you get a second?
Sure, yeah, it's still out there, but yeah, I make a motion to table this until further review.
Seeing no seconds, and motion fails. So, any final comments on the motion in front of us then? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Motion carries 3-1. Okay. That does it for the special session. If I could have Michael come forward, Michael from Veritas, I have 2 proclamations. Okay, our first proclamation is Transgender Day of Remembrance. It's November 20th, 2017. Whereas the city of Hagerstown is fully committed to the safety, well-being, and health of its citizens and of all people. The commemoration of Transgender Day of Remembrance is an expression of this commitment. Whereas Transgender Day of Remembrance was founded in 1998 by Gwendolyn Ann Smith, a transgender graphic designer, columnist, and activist who wished to memorialize the murder of Rita Hester, a member of the transgender community of Boston, Massachusetts. Since its inception, Transgender Day of Remembrance has been held annually on the 20th of November. Whereas Transgender Day of Remembrance is an opportunity for people to come together to mark the tragic deaths of transgender and gender-variant individuals, as well as those who are perceived to be transgender, who have been murdered as a result of hate and crime. And whereas in 2016, advocates recorded at least 23 deaths of transgender people in the United States due to fatal violence. 2017 has already seen at least 25 transgender people fatally shot or killed by other violent means. And whereas an estimated 1.4 million adults in the United States identify as transgender, according to the Williams Institute, a research group based out of UCLA, approximately 22,300 individuals identify as transgender in the state of Maryland, ranking Maryland as the 32nd in the lineup of states with highest transgender populations. And whereas a Transgender Day of Remembrance raises public awareness of hate crimes against transgender people, publicly mourns and honors the lives of transgender people, and reminds the general public that transgender people are also sons, daughters, parents, friends, partners, and family members. And whereas now observed worldwide, 2017 is the 19th year making the annual Transgender Day of Remembrance. Now therefore be resolved in support of the City Council, I, Robert E. Brucci II, Mayor of the City of Hagerstown, Maryland, do hereby proclaim November 20th, 2017 as Transgender Day of Remembrance in Hagerstown and encourage all citizens to work toward ending all forms of violence against others.
I would just like to let everybody know that November 20th, there will be a candlelight vigil on the public square. If anybody would be interested in attending, from 6 to 7 p.m. On the corner of the square where the Christmas tree is at. And on behalf of the pastor, I'd like to thank you and council and the City of Hagerstown for taking the time to recognize this Awareness Day. And the pastor, since his apologies, he was sick.
It's going around, I understand.
Okay.
Our next proclamation is World AIDS Day, December 1st, 2017. Whereas World AIDS Day is held on December 1st each year and is an opportunity for people worldwide to unite in the fight against HIV, show their support for people living with HIV, and to commemorate people who have died from an AIDS-related illness. Whereas the global epidemic of HIV infections and AIDS requires a worldwide effort to increase communication, education, and united action to stop the spread of HIV/AIDS, and whereas globally an estimated 36.7 million people have HIV, more than 35 million people have died from the virus, making it one of the most destructive pandemics in history. And whereas there were 1,118 adult adolescent HIV cases aged 13 plus diagnosed in Maryland in 2016, and at the end of 2016, there were 30,430 adolescent adults living with HIV in Maryland. And whereas in Washington County, for every 100,000 people, there are 8.7 people living with HIV. And whereas World AIDS Day serves as a reminder for citizens to educate themselves about the risk of HIV, know their HIV status through testing, receiving care if infected, and demonstrate compassion for those infected and affected by HIV and AIDS. Now therefore be resolved in support of the City Council, I, Robert E. Brucci II, Mayor of the City of Hagerstown, Maryland, do hereby affirm its commitment to public health and proclaim December 1st, 2017 as World AIDS Day in Hagerstown, Maryland.
Again, on behalf of Veritas, I would like to thank the City of Hagerstown, Mayor Brucci, for recognizing these days of awareness. We tend to forget about the HIV/AIDS epidemic as medications have gotten better, but it's still there, even though the rate of new infections has went down to some degree. The youth percentage has risen, and so it's definitely an issue that we still need to address and educate about.
done, Jen?
Thank you.
There you go.
Thank
Thank you, man. Tell Pastor.
you. Will do.
Okay, next on the agenda is donation offer for City Park. Rodney, city engineer, and Jennifer Kiefer, our city attorney.
Good afternoon. From time to time, staff, we get offers of donations to the city for items that are intended to be displayed in public spaces and used in public spaces. We've seen things from art to holiday decorations to even waterfowl be offered for donation. As a general approach to this, the staff takes that we don't accept these items unless there's just some significant value about them that we feel like we need to bring them to this body. And we recently received an offer of a nativity scene to be displayed during the upcoming season in City Park. The obvious issues with that, Jen has been involved with, and she can explain that in more detail. I guess it's our recommendation that we don't accept a donation such as that, but if we do accept it, then we feel like we need to put together a procedure to be able to do that and to manage that. So I don't know if you have anything you wanted to share on top of that, but.
I would just note that if the city decides to go down the road of permitting displays of religious symbols, any policy that is adopted has to be content neutral, and that means that the city shouldn't allow one group to place any kind of religious imagery on public property while denying another group, and that would span all religious beliefs. As I was discussing this with staff, we also were kicking around what a policy would look like, whether it would be a donation to the city. I would just suggest that a donation policy is probably more problematic than something like a licensing agreement, because it would create greater government involvement, including the use of city resources to install, maintain, uninstall, store, as well as greater possibility that there may be the appearance of a content-based regulation or favoring of one type of religious imagery over another.
So.
So the recommendation is not to accept.
We think that would be the straightforward thing to do.
Okay. Counsel?
I mean, I don't have any interest in accepting such donations. I don't see the necessity to do so, and I conveyed, you know, in my communication with staff and with mayor and council, that to me, it's a simpler process. I use I think the one Easter egg hunt we went to at City Park a few years back, where, you know, it was clearly an Easter egg hunt organized and carried out, either sponsored or directly carried out by a religious affiliated entity. And you know, the overtones of it were much more religious oriented than they were Easter egg hunt oriented at that particular. And people get to choose whether they want to continue to attend that or not attend. But for me, and I said it very plainly, any user that wants to use city-owned parks or facilities or properties, I think we should have a user agreement, just like we do with softball and baseball and BMX and the band shell and anything else. And if this entity wants to put up a nativity scene, or another an entity wants to put up something else, then they make application through that user agreement to reserve that space for that specified time frame for the specified costs associated with renting that space, and it gets submitted through the process of approval, and it either gets approved or it doesn't get approved, you know, for whatever the tenets of that reason may be. I don't see.
Can I just ask you on that issue? To my knowledge, we do not rent space for displays. We make reservations for people who are gonna use the
You're saying we don't
facility.
because no one, but clearly, and I use the Easter egg hunt as an example, there were clearly displays associated with that activity
No,
that were not
you're
of that nature.
You're
And so,
misunderstanding me. When I say that, that was a function where people were invited there to do something, and the displays were concurrent with that. So that if, in fact, somebody wanted to have that type of display when they were there, I
I
thought
get
it
you.
really,
I don't
the
see
question
it
is
much
whether,
different.
whether somebody can reserve a pavilion for 3 weeks
that's right.
for putting a display up when it's not going to be used.
That's what I'm
otherwise.
saying, so let's say I come in, and I'm user X, and it's November 29th, and I say, hey, City of Hagerstown, I want to reserve the band shell from November 29th through December 26th. And I want to put this item here, you know, as the purpose of me being a user to use that space. And you'll say, okay, let's see, that's X number of hours at X location. Here's your user agreement, provide your proof of insurance, provide your fee. To me, I don't think it's much different than what some of the schools do, you know, that rent out gym space, or some of the schools that rent out for church-related activities. I guess I don't see why we would need to accept something of ownership from any entity where we suddenly assume the complete responsibility of it versus saying, hey, if you want to do this at this specific location for this specific period, you submit an application, it either gets approved or it doesn't get approved.
The only spaces that we rent in City Park, there were pavilions and the band shell, as you said, so. I
And
guess
I'm
that was all-
assuming.
Is that because that's the only space anybody's ever asked for?
Yeah.
Let's say if I came to you and I said, man, I really, you know, like the one softball field in the back, or you know, I want to rent out that open space area, you know, around the
pod.
around the circle. No, around the circle up towards the south end. You're in the north end, I'm in the south end. You know, for some activity.
Right, or the tennis courts or something like that. We have
Activity.
actually set up for those
That's right.
activities.
But I think activity and static displays are a hugely different thing. I mean, I personally, there's no way I would want to allow anybody who wants to pay X amount of money to put up a static display on our city property just because they pay money and want to, so that we can have a Nazi swastika in the middle of the lake for 10 months because somebody said they want to rent it? That doesn't.
But that's what I'm saying, is it's all subject to that review and approval process.
Okay, but,
But how do you just-
but
how do you
we aren't gonna make a
decide?
review process based upon content. So we have to make a review process of how are we gonna use the property, and all I'm saying, if we're going to allow anybody to rent space for static displays, then we open us up to allowing anything in our property at all with no control over it. And so the only way, and we can't, and we're gonna get into a conversation later today about content, but I think the issue is we either allow static displays or we don't.
But that's what I'm saying, so you go down this road of this user agreement and say, okay, the decision we've made is
No.
we're not going to do this.
That's fine.
All I'm saying is that's the path I think we should be going
Right.
down in that discussionary mode, not the, you know, accept or not accept. Yeah.
No, and I think, you know, this is sort of turned, we had an executive committee meeting that I think the reason you're getting this is because the conversations in that meeting were very different than the conversations we're having now. Very different. And let's be frank, we're told, this isn't about whether or not we should have a policy, this is about whether or not we should allow that display to take place in City Park. And we've been told if we don't, we're gonna get sued. Okay, so let's lay it out of what we're really discussing. Do we allow that display in City Park? And we had we had discussions that were very different than the discussions that we had tonight, I have to tell you. But if staff and council are recommending that we do not, then I have no problems with that. I think the theory behind accepting it is the theory that if it were going to go up, it would have to go up in conjunction with our holiday display and be part of that display, which is exclusively owned and controlled by the city. Nobody has the right to come and put something out with our holiday display. They have to donate it to us. And then we make the decision if we're going to accept it and where we're going to put it. So I think that the question was, if this display was going to be allowed, how would it be done? And if it would be done, it would be done under that methodology.
I hear you. I think it's hokey to be calling what we put up a holiday display, though. That's just my personal opinion.
Well, it's a Christian, I have no problem with
So
that.
many communities do it, and
No,
that's fine.
but
That's what
Christian,
they
the
do.
only reason I say that,
But-
because I'm a Christmas guy, okay? I may be Jewish, but I'm a Merry Christmas fellow, and I've had Santa Claus in my family since I was a little kid. The reason I said that is strictly using that term in a legal perspective. Santa Claus, gift boxes, trains are, quote, in legal terms, holiday displays. They're not religious in nature. And so, believe me, the only reason I used that word was the distinction in the two. Because there was also a request not only to have this placed, but these folks have their idea where they want to place it, which is right in the middle of City Park Lake, which did not fit with the theories we had. But if the answer is we should not accept it, I have no problems with that. And if we're not going to accept it, then the answer is, if we have a policy of no static displays other than those that the city put up or that are in conjunction with activities. So, yeah, if they wanted, and we had other discussions about people having the right to assemble and do what they want to do versus a static display. I think that's the issue.
I'm fine with not accepting it. I think accepting it opens a slippery slope of, what if 20 more people come forward with 20 more displays they'd like to put in City Park Lake? Are we just gonna fill the lake with stuff for a holiday? I just think it's a slippery slope to go down.
And I have no problems with that. So the policy we have is that we would not accept anything other than with our approval. I mean, we accept things all the time, every year. I hope we accept things out there.
So we don't want a user agreement then?
I'm sorry?
We don't want to put together a user agreement of any kind?
Well, I think
Well,
we
we
have a
already have an
user
agreement, don't
agreement,
we?
but that's not
Somebody wants to rent
relevant
a
in
pavilion,
this.
do we
Not
haven't?
for static display,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Different.
So you're
We're not
asking,
gonna accept it, and we're not gonna allow it, basically. Right? That's where we're at,
Static
right?
displays that the city provides.
well, I think Lou said if we're not gonna accept it, then that answers the question of, would it be displayed or not?
Right, wouldn't be.
Because, yeah, there's nothing to display.
No, just trying to,
Yeah. Now, you brought up a question though about the user agreement in regards to static displays, and that we don't have, correct? We don't have a,
we don't have a user agreement on
Set up
static
for that,
displays
right.
now.
Because then you couldn't make a decision based on content going
Right.
forward. So
Sure.
then we would be in a situation where choosing one over another, which we could not be doing.
oh, and I don't disagree with that. I mean, I think. looking
Sounds like a
for-
dead issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hagerstown Business Revolving Loan Program Guideline Updates, Jonathan Kearns, Community Development Manager.
A little bit.
But I was going a little crazy. Well,
Good afternoon. Ashley's handing out a document showing the Business Revolving Loan Fund guidelines with recommended updates. The program started in 1999, and I believe the last updates occurred in roughly 2010. And I would say that the majority of the updates that we're recommending this evening I would consider housekeeping. Most of them just are simply reflecting actual practice. The updates were discussed at length with the city attorney, Jason Morton, and our Hagerstown Loan Review Authority. And I want to thank Brian Selders, a member of that group who's in attendance this evening. Just a couple highlights of the guideline updates. Once again, many of these are housekeeping, such as changing the old reference to the Hagerstown Redevelopment Authority, which was the HRA. That was changed to the Hagerstown Loan Review Authority. Adding some flexibility to the interest rate section of the guidelines. Would be good if we have certain applicants that, if there's maybe a little more of a credit concern, sometimes interest rates can be a bit higher, but we can still work out loans with them. In general, the way the interest rate guidelines were written before, it was basically always a 3% loan. It's still written that all loans would have a minimum interest rate of 3%, but once again, it builds in some flexibility for the HLRA to make individual decisions on interest rate on a case-by-case basis. Making sure that we have standard language for late payments through the loan program of 5%. Also removing some language that really doesn't appear to be applicable to the program. There was some language in the existing guidelines referencing community development block grant job creation requirements. So we're recommending that that is removed. And also updating the guidelines to reflect current practice. Any loans currently that are $10,000 or more, we put those in front of the HLRA for decision. Any loans that would be between $5,000 and $10,000, staff could approve those at the staff level. The document that we handed out this evening, all of the items that are being deleted or recommended being deleted are simply in red font with a strike through. The language that's being added is just in red font. Our goal would be to update the guidelines either during November regular session or December regular session with a resolution, depending on if there's any concerns or questions from the mayor and council.
All right, I have one, and that would be ineligible activities, page 3. You know, one-time massage parlors were what this envisions massage parlors to be. However, my understanding is a law on massage in Maryland for years has been that you have to be a licensed massage therapist to be in operation. So I see the very place that our chiropractor doctor brings a little fried down off the Cultural Trail.
Baltimore Street.
Yeah. Would somebody consider that a massage parlor?
I
So
will- I will-
the answer to the is we need some definition.
Sure.
I think.
That language is added simply because that language mirrors the state of Maryland grant agreement language. We could check with Maryland on that, and the reason we had
I
added that.
understand why it's in
was
there. I just propose we just get some language
clarity.
somehow to explain the difference between what this is trying to limit and legitimate massage therapy.
Understood.
Anybody else? Okay.
Believe me, we used to have a massage parlor downtown.
We'll look for clarity from the state, and we'll work with Jason on
Corner Jonathan and Franklin.
Thank you, Ashley. And thank you, Brian.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Home ownership program guideline updates.
So following up from, I believe, roughly a month ago during the October 10th work session, there was a comprehensive discussion on city-owned properties, and a portion of that discussion, we talked about some of our long-term CDBG home ownership properties. What we would like to do is to update the existing home ownership program guidelines. The goal was to create some flexibility within the guidelines that may make it a bit easier to dispose of those properties, especially the ones that have been held long-term. In general, the guideline updates that we're proposing this evening, they all would still meet community development block grant regulations. The guidelines to touch on each one, for the current homeownership program, all units within the homeownership program must be sold to the HUD income limits where households are 80% of the area median income or lower. The block grant program regulations actually allow duplex units to be one of two for that requirement. So we have 2 duplexes, soon to be 3, with the 261 South Prospect Street project. This guideline update would align with CDBG regulations and allow income restrictions to be lifted on one of those 2 units for each duplex. The current guidelines also state that all properties must be resold at appraised value. We're recommending that we put a caveat to that in the guidelines that can be waived on a case-by-case basis if waived by the mayor and council. Also, the guidelines require all of those units to be sold for owner occupancy, hence obviously the home ownership program. I think we're looking to maybe, once again, provide some flexibility if we have uses that are non-owner occupancy, but still could meet CDBG regulations. We would like to have permission to waive that requirement on a case-by-case basis if waived by the mayor and council. The last recommended change, if you look at the program guidelines, it requires the city to, I believe, send out RFPs.
Well, can you go, wait, can you stop me?
Sorry.
Give me an example of number 3.
Number 3, say for instance, there would be a nonprofit community partner that would be interested in those homes, but it would be used as a rental occupancy versus an owner occupancy status. The CDBG regulations could still be met with proper income levels for the household occupants if it's a rental or an owner occupant. So we just wanted to provide some flexibility, knowing that once again, those properties that have been held long-term, it may create an opportunity to where we can get rid of those
Right.
properties sooner rather
I'm
than
in,
later.
I got you, I got you.
And once again, the last recommended update, the old guidelines, which are a bit dated, I believe they were adopted maybe in the mid-90s, it had an RFP process built in for the city to obtain services from private mortgage companies to provide mortgages to buyers through the home ownership program. And mortgages would either be through that company that won the RFP process, or it was a combination of that mortgage company that won the RFP process and an in-house mortgage held by the city, or an in-house mortgage held by the city. That practice has not happened in a long time. We typically have steered people in the past to the Maryland Mortgage Program or private lenders of their choice. So that guideline update is simply reflecting actual practice. A thing to note about number 4 is the current guidelines require a 5-year residency requirement. And there's a clawback if someone would buy a home ownership property, live it as an owner occupant, but they leave after 2 years. There's a clawback to recover some funding in that scenario because they didn't meet their 5-year obligation. If the city is not the mortgage holder, it's much more difficult to enforce any type of clawback provision because, once again, we've gotten away from that practice, I think, maybe in the early 2000s once the Maryland Mortgage Program became more popular. So we may have to come back to the drawing board a bit if we still want to have a 5-year residence owner occupancy requirement, or if we just want to nix that all together. And our goal would be to verify the mayor and council are good with these guideline updates. Through the block grant regulations, we do have to do a local advertisement to amend our CDBG, one of our CDBG program guidelines, and they would likely then become effective at the end of this year.
Do you think these proposed updates will be able to help us sell these properties?
I think it would be, it would create some flexibility, some more flexibility that we haven't had in the past, the way the current guidelines are written.
I think we're all in agreement that sooner we can sell these, the better.
Yeah, we're exploring some opportunities for some of the long-term owned properties, the duplexes on Jonathan Street, and some of those opportunities would definitely fit on the occupancy requirement versus owner occupancy versus rental.
Okay. Sounds good. Thank you, John.
Thank you.
All right. For standing broadcasting discussion. Who wants to start?
Well, I'll be happy to.
Let's see what
Came
wants
on,
to
yeah.
start.
I'll be happy to. I'm, given the fact that I really haven't said anything about this prior to now. You know, we talked about a slippery slope tonight earlier. And we talked about if you allow one type of display, then you open up the community to not being in a position to turn down any types of displays. Now, I would say a couple things. First of all, we're a government, we're not a business, okay? So if I, as a businessman, don't like the content of a TV or radio station, not only is it my right, but it seems to me I'd be a hypocrite to advertise on a station as a private individual where I objected to their content. But we aren't a business, we're a government. And the reason we advertise, I would like to think, is because somebody in our staff believes it is a good expenditure of our funds to advertise, whether it's a Blues Fest or whatever it is. Somebody has decided that it is an appropriate way to get the word to the people, and they have made the decision of what stations to use to broadcast on based upon the best use of that money. When we as a government decide to stop doing business with an entity because we object to the content of their broadcasting, I believe we have gone down that slippery slope of First Amendment rights. If this is the best place for us to get our money out of advertising, that's where we should use it. We should not use our government power and the power of our purse to punish content of speech. And therefore, I believe the only thing we should do about this issue is, one, what we have done, which is express our concern and dissatisfaction, and two, have our staff continue to make decisions about how to advertise and who to advertise with, not taking into consideration content of discussion. Again, if we're going to do that, every dollar we spend in the entire city for advertising should go to WJG Radio, who is everything as close to a community radio station as exists.
Correct.
But they may not be the best station to advertise for the Blues Fest. You know, it's just as simple as that. So that's my 2 cents for what it's worth. I understand the outrage. When I first saw it on social media, I didn't realize it was really a radio station did that. I thought somebody made it up and were acting like they were listening to it and thought, boy, somebody spent an awful lot of time doing this. But I think we very appropriately objected and expressed our concern, but that's it.
Next.
But I respectfully disagree with that. I think that, yes, we are a government entity, but I think the city of Hagerstown is all of our business. And I just can't fathom spending money with a company who would say the things that they said. And again, it's not about being offended, it's not about it. Why would you spend money with a company who's blatantly telling people not to come here? Makes no sense to me. And then on top of this, you know, they went on this apology tour, contacted me individually, the mayor individually. A week later, their zombie prom at Breakaways, which is not in Hagerstown city limits, gets canceled because of something that had nothing to do with the city of Hagerstown, since they are not even located in city limits, and they allowed us to take the blame for it. They never once, they made a statement saying, you know, it's not gonna happen this year, but they never once clarified, even though we were being blamed for it, that it wasn't the city of Hagerstown's. So you wanna talk about rubbing salt into wounds, there was already a problem. You know, they're claiming that they're sorry, it was a result of one employee, and then they turn around and don't even clarify that it wasn't our fault that their event was shut down, and we got more horrible press out of it. You know, people were tagging me, I'm sure they were tagging him, calling us all kinds of names. You know, how dare you guys overstep your authority and shut this down? We had nothing to do with it, it's not even in our jurisdiction. The fact that they didn't come out and clarify that it was not our fault, I thought was just tacky on top of an already tacky move, and
I might say, Emily, in no way, shape, or form am I saying to you that we should direct our staff to advertise with them. So for instance, when you
Well,
say,
I
I can't imagine why we would advertise on a radio station that is saying to people, don't come to Hagerstown, well, I would like to think our staff would say that's not an effective way to spend our money. But one
can see that.
thing that was discussed here was not withholding money from whatever that station is, it was 101.5 or something like that, I didn't even know it existed because I'm an old man. But we discussed withholding any advertising money from any radio stations that this company owns, notwithstanding whether that radio station is an easy listening radio station that has no mentions of Hagerstown at all. So again, it may very well be that this isn't the radio station that staff determines to advertise on because they're not a good station for us because it's defeating the purpose. But to make it across the board to radio stations that I don't even know who they are, I just think is a mistake. And I think it's a mistake for us as a city government, elected officials, to make that determination. That's all.
And I think the ordinance that said we should never do business with them again, I think, that, I don't think any of us thought that that was appropriate. I mean, I guess you're right, if staff, I trust in their judgment as well, but I just can't fathom wanting to spend any money right now, and especially after the negativity that this brought.
Anybody else?
No, I mean, I think Lou pretty much hit the nail on the head there, and Emily kind of piggybacked on there towards the end of what we were reviewing a few weeks ago was about counseling all business, current and the future, pretty much in perpetuity.
Never do it again.
Never do it with any one of these radio stations, whether it's the 101.5, the country station, the sports station, whatever have you. And to me, that was just painting it with a little too bit of a broad brush. I agree. I think that the staff, they're aware, and I think they would use the discretion as necessary. I also think we'd be remiss, though, not to listen to Verstanden's apology and, act on, there were some talks of some advertising being given back as far as, radio spots and things of that nature. I mean, I think, again, we'd be remiss not to at least listen to that, whether it's on that particular station or one of the other stations, if we could get some airtime in return. I mean, I think that that would be good, because in reality, as Lou said, we're gonna advertise with somebody, whether it's this station or somebody else. It's not like if we don't advertise with them, that advertising money is gonna go to something else. It's gonna continue with advertising. But if we can get, something back from that, then maybe, it's probably a drop in the bucket in the grand scheme of things, but can move some things around if need be. I just, obviously the message hurt. There's no disagreement with that. I don't think anyone at this table is delusional to think that there are not real issues here in the city of Hagerstown that talks about. But again, I would agree with Lou that I think that we're overstepping our boundaries as a body here a little too much as far as what can and will be handled, I'm sure, by our staff.
Kristen, anything from you?
Well, again, I was an avid listener of 101.5. I'm not familiar with the other stations. Here was part of the difficulty I had. We weren't one on that list of radio spoofs. We probably weren't even 10. There's a whole there was a whole page of them. And just for me, since we tabled the motion, I had to play out in my mind if we weren't the entity that raised the issue. Let's say it was a CVB, and they raised the issue, or especially if it was a small community of Clear Spring, they raised the issue. I would venture to bet that there would be some rallying process around those neighboring jurisdictions. It's just the way it works. Generally, there'd be some rallying around Morgansville. There'd be some rallying around Smithsburg and Clear Spring and Williamsport. But in our case, there wouldn't be. It's so easy. I had this conversation with some friends about 2 weeks ago. We disagreed on this particular point. And, they immediately went into this process of, well, that's the way it is. Well, that's the way you are. Well, that's how, it is. And so there is no effort. There was no effort. There has been no effort, to see it any differently. And I just don't don't understand why you'd spend money with an entity that doesn't even want folks to see it any differently. Actually wants folks to see it as poorly as they possibly can. That wouldn't happen if it had been the Clear Spring Mayor and Council talking about this issue. That would not have been public persona. That would not have been public feedback, because the reality is folks out there, including this incident as a shining example, make it so easy to encourage the populace in this greater community to dump on this particular community. And that's sad. And I think it's unfortunate that you'd want to invest your community's resources in an entity that would make that conscious decision.
So what I gather from the conversation this evening and the conversation over the last probably 5 weeks, yeah, there were some disparaging things said in a parody commercial or skit done by one of 1.5, Bob Rocks. Did it shine an ugly light on some ugly truths that the city of Hagerstown faces every single day? Of course it did. Do I think it could have been done much better? Again, as I pointed out in one of my several attempts to set the record straight on social media, Bob Rocks is not Jimmy Fallon, and he needs to up his game a little bit if he's going to be funny at the same time as he's taking shots at people. So, I would suggest, of course, that we continue to let our very qualified staff, Aaron Anderson et al., to continue to monitor our advertising dollars correctly and utilize them the best way they seem fit. And if we can have a consensus on that, that would be great.
I agree with that.
Very adequate staff.
I guess I'll agree with that because I do trust in our staff, but I just for the life of me cannot fathom why we would want to spend another penny with this organization. And I stand by that, and I will continue to stand by that, and you can call me any names you want in the comment section of Herald Mail tomorrow. I just cannot fathom that we would spend another
But
penny
see, I don't
with an
think this
organization.
discussion is that we are agreing to spend
You got
that
it.
money. That's
You
not
got
what
it,
we're
Paul.
saying here.
You got it.
I know, I just need to,
Absolutely correct.
I trust in our staff to make the right decision, that's fine. You're right, capable staff, but man, I hope they,
Settled in. Thank you very much. No more discussion about this.
Well, wait.
Oh, well, wait,
Still?
okay.
This is sitting as a
Oh,
table
it's sitting
item
on
on
the
your
table,
agenda.
so we have to take it
so
off next meeting.
Yeah, it'll
It
come
would
up the
have
next
to,
meeting.
it's either
we'll vote.
removed from the table and then either
And
voted
actually,
for or against.
yeah, and actually, that particular motion, I think, would have had a 5-0 vote, 4-0 vote. I think Kristen even tried to get it amended because it was a permanent,
Right.
never again for everybody, and I don't think any of us were interested in that.
Okay, we'll take care of that at the next voting session.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
All right. City Administrator comments.
Just a reminder that this Friday evening is the city center tree lighting, beginning at Yes, it is this Friday, November
Yes,
17th.
That's what we were all maybe
Public
sitting here,
Square.
yeah.
The activities start at 5 and the tree lighting is actually at 6.
Okay.
That's all I had, Mayor.
Lou? Two things. One, the luncheon was very nice today. Congratulations to Doug Wright for his award, which was very deserved. And I had the pleasure of the ribbon cutting today at our Korean restaurant right across the street, and it's quite a pleasure, a nice turnout, and very good food. Very, very good food. You know, I usually don't make it to a lot of these ribbon cuttings, but when I saw the Korean restaurant, I was like, I need to go to that.
Especially when they feed you.
Right, you got it.
Thank you. Paul?
A couple of things, just piggyback a little bit off these two. Not only with the Christmas tree lighting this weekend, there's also, I believe, the Beach Boys are in town, at the theater. There's a Christmas Carol at the Washington County Playhouse, and all my sons at the Potomac Playmakers. So lots of events in downtown Hagerstown this weekend. Ribbon cuttings, I believe, is tomorrow, the chamber event? The
Yes,
chamber.
4 o'clock.
Right, so thanks to Paul Fry for moving over there, and to Mike Fitzgerald for putting that building together, so that should be a good thing as well. One thing I want to bring up, well, two things, additional things. One, there's been some discussions over a little bit past period of time in regards to 901 dual highway. And I know there's been some internal discussions, but I think this needs to be brought to the forefront and discussed as far as what our possibilities are, what, the situations are out there in regards to the hotel property, the crime that's occurred out there, things of that nature. So, I guess I would inquire if anyone else is interested in hearing more of that, because I think it's long
I'd
overdue.
like to get a presentation from,
Absolutely.
from those who've been involved at a work session.
From all across the
very
board,
near
from
future.
police, from code and planning, from, finance, because there's some talks about the, what that building is, or that property is in. Go ahead.
And Paul, just for the listening audience, when we talk about 901 Dual Highway, I don't think many people understand what we're talking about.
Referencing the Garden Plaza
Right,
Hotel,
Old Ramada, right.
Old Ramada, Clarion, and that nature, so,
I concur.
all right.
Yep.
Kristen, do you want to hear more of that? All right. Lastly, is, there was discussions going on here today about this McCleary Hill letter. We just need to put this to bed. Are we sending this letter or not?
If the mayor wants to send it on behalf of the mayor, he should, but he does not have a majority of the council, so it should
The letter
not
isn't
say.
stated that way, so the letter is stated the underside, not
But
council.
I thought I saw something in the beginning mention the council.
That's the
maybe I
previous
missed it.
council. Paul, that letter's on Danny's desk,
Right.
and the signatures are.
Because it
Paul's.
was my understanding that I was opposed to it, you were opposed to it, and you were opposed to it. If I'm incorrect there.
Well, Kristen already sent his own letter.
Right.
But I also understand when Don was here that it was clear that 3 of the councilmen were not opposed to it.
There was no discussion of a letter for
No.
pro or against.
No, at that time there wasn't. There was just a
Correct.
question of whether there was support or lack of support. And that's all I just want to say, that there's never been.
Well, I'm going to point out exactly what Emily pointed out in her email earlier today, that this letter that will be sent will do nothing to
I understand.
stop this development or do, I believe the way that the letter was constructed, points out how we feel that the detriment will be to the other citizens of Hagerstown who have to pick up the cost for services that will need to be rendered in that area. And that this development was not what was proposed in 2005 when that property was annexed and then rezoned. So that's basically what this letter states. It doesn't, again, do I think it's a fruitless effort? Sure I do. Do I believe that people need to stand by their convictions? Sure I do.
I think that's what the conversation's about, just making sure that it's not misrepresented who stands.
It is not misrepresented.
That's fine, Bob. That's absolutely fine. That's-
Well, I'll only say 2 things to that. One is, You do mention in that meeting, you state very specifically, there's a difference between this development and the last one, whether you get a letter of support from us or not, really doesn't matter. You say, I support this. Don says, I support this. Emily indicates a point of neutrality, and all I'm saying, and as I've said before, is, you know, I think we need an opinion, as it applies to Robert's Rules of Order, let's say, you know, how that process works.
But see, that's not the way that process played out that you just indicated. I mean, those three things did happen at three different separate points in time in that discussion.
I mean, I hear what you're saying, but if that letter would have, if that process would have played out through that conversation
But it did not.
in that discussion, and there would have been three members that say, yes, let's submit something in this period in which it is the official period of comment, something would have been submitted for the official record. There were three individuals that clearly indicated a deference of interest to submit a position in either direction, and at least two members that stated a position of support. I'm trying to pull up the letter now because I think in the second paragraph of that letter, it does say the city. It doesn't say council, it doesn't say mayor, but I believe it does say the city. When something says the city, it represents a position of the official body, i.e. the city. And all I'm saying is if that's the case, then I go back to Robert's Rules of Order, and I'm not trying, you know, I'm not trying to rain on any parade here because I have that opposing position. But I wouldn't want to be on the other side of that fence you know, on any matter, and that rule of procedure be
Yeah, but see, you can't go back
affected.
and take Don's support position at this point in time, because I've been on the other side of the fence when we talked about another project where he wasn't here
That's right.
about a point of support, and I was just told, well, that's just the way it is.
So, that's right. So unless any member,
So you can't have it
present or
both
not, I
ways.
mean, he's a sitting member of council. So if the majority, if one member of the majority, we run into this all the time, everything else, if one member of the majority doesn't bring the issue back up for reconsideration, the issue cannot be brought back up for reconsideration. It's a very
But it was never
plain.
brought up for consideration.
Well,
It was never brought up for consideration at any time.
I think that meeting
Correct, I
was
brought it up.
fairly,
What, a
No, you
month
brought it up
ago?
in council comments,
Right.
not.
Oh, I asked if we needed a motion, and everyone sat around here and had, you know,
And there was no
amnesia, didn't
motion,
want to
because we don't do
discuss
that in
anything.
council comments.
So could I ask why we're gonna send a letter that's gonna do nothing? It's gonna do nothing. I mean, this is a feel-good political, make the Cedar Lawn residents say the city
If
of
I recall
Hagerstown, whatever.
correctly, both
That, like,
yourself and Councilwoman Messenger went to the meeting with the Cedar Lawn residents and both sat there and said that you didn't support it either.
No,
So
that
you
is
went-
incorrect.
Oh, you stood up. You stood up and put your finger on the table and said, of course we don't support this. Do you think the city of
No,
Hagerstown wants this?
No,
Oh,
I
yes.
know.
Oh,
I
absolutely.
said I would not support any of these types of things where we don't get our money back. But I never said that I did not support this particular item. Yeah,
Okay, I'm done.
Yeah, I'm just saying, you want to talk about politics.
I'm done
so
with the
that's fine.
conversation
I
about
just-
it, and I
Well, no,
I
you
will.
don't get to make a statement for me that is not true. I didn't sit in that meeting and said I did or did not support anything. In fact, I didn't say anything because I was appalled by the behavior of that meeting. I don't represent that. I'm not gonna send a letter of opposition because it's not gonna stop it. This is just,
Okay,
I
so
mean,
we'll just sit on the sidelines and just because you don't agree with something, you're
it's
not going to
gonna
stop it.
happen.
We're not gonna, listen,
That's fine.
I will do one thing when we leave this meeting this evening, and I will go and I will reread that letter, and if I feel that it's inappropriate, that there's a mention that it shouldn't be in there, I will rewrite the letter for the two signatures that will go on the letter.
yeah, and I
Bottom
think
line.
that's fine, Mary. I think that's my only concern. I have no problems at all.
Not a problem.
With
If
you
I,
bringing
if
a
I,
letter and-
when I tweet that earlier today, if I missed that, that's on me, so. All right, Kristen, anything from you?
yeah. Speaking of the Housing Authority, I did attend the monthly meeting. I think it was last week. And as folks are aware, you know, they've sold the property, which, as I pointed out in that particular letter, it talks about, you know, maybe some reconsideration should be given of a location. I don't know what that means, but clearly this entity, whose prior plan was to utilize that particular location has now sold the property. And so I'm not even sure what a location means, but as I pointed out at least 2 meetings ago, I know that there were rumblings of folks trying to encourage the Housing Authority to reconsider a site that they no longer own now, without any awareness being provided by the neighboring community of Greenberry Hills and area. And for me, I just find it odd that you would say, okay, we hear the ire of the Cedar Lawn folks, and we're gonna, go to the entity and say, hey, why don't you go, back to the other area, but what occurs when Greenberry Hills raises that ire? Just, I found some irony in that whole process. That's all I have.
Well, Sean and I spoke after the sale of the property, and he has some ideas that he wants to get with about increasing home ownership with some of those proceeds, and I believe that that could be a positive step for the city of Hagerstown. So I'm more than willing to have those conversations with him.
Speaking of that, going back to the finance, there was some discussion a month or two back about the pilot or how that would or would not affect with this particular project. And last
We
time,
have not got the numbers as far as I know
Finance
yet.
director are gonna look into that and get back to us.
I'm meeting with Mr. Griffith this week to understand what is their request going to even be. Are they gonna request a pilot, or what will it be?
And the
So we
state
are-
of Maryland, if I'm not mistaken, sets what the percentage of the pilot will actually amount to. It doesn't, we have no control over it.
No, we would have control. If it's a situation in which they meet all the requirements of the housing authority that would be allowed to have a pilot, we have the ability to negotiate a pilot.
Okay.
And it would be within, within our, whatever we could negotiate.
So it won't
with
be a
them.
continuance of the current pilot that is out there.
That's what I wanna
Right,
try to
that's what we need to
understand
find.
what they're,
Okay.
what they're
All right.
asking.
Let us know,
They have
please.
not formally requested
Yeah, it was
a
very
pilot.
confusing, because at one time I thought I heard them say that they were a private entity owning it, that were non-running it, and therefore they would pay real taxes.
Yeah, I've heard
That's
different things.
You heard that
The
too?
individual homeowner people would pay taxes, the
Yeah.
rental properties would
Yeah,
pay
they
taxes.
would. That is for
But then
sure.
also that their existing pilot would carry over or not carry over, or as you just said to me, I just think there's a lot of,
I don't have an answer for
well,
you
I
yet.
don't expect you, I just wanna
Yeah,
make sure that's still
Absolutely.
to be brought
Okay.
towards us in the near future.
Yep.
Okay, cool. Anything else, Kristen? Okay, Emily?
On Friday, I got to attend the donor meeting for the University System of Maryland, Hagerstown, for the Physician's Assistant Program. It was at the Grand Piano Ballroom on Friday evening. And I have to tell you, there was about 100 people in this room who have donated and are making this program possible. And we owe them a lot, because one, the energy in this room about bringing a Physician's Assistant Program to Hagerstown was amazing. I wish you guys all could have been there. They spoke about Hagerstown in a way that we don't hear people speak about Hagerstown right now, because the negative voices have been so loud. But the people in this room were thrilled about the development that this is going to bring. The lady who's going to run the program had so many good things to say. So my hat's off to Mark Hasley for leading that, and everyone else that was involved. It was a really motivating, positive thing to be a part of. So thank them. It's huge for Hagerstown, and I think we need to get that word out there that it is coming, and the people that are making it happen. Because the Fletcher Foundation donated a ton of money. I mean, they're just people that are shelling out money for the best interest of Hagerstown and the surrounding areas, and it was great to attend.
Cool. All right, my turn. Last Wednesday, several of us attended the Economic Summit at Fountainhead, presentation by Anand Basu, talking about economic projections. In case you don't know who he is, he's an economist who has spoken at this summit for the last 17 years, I believe it is now. Does a great job. He's a funny guy. He can bring some jocularity along with his presentation, which makes it, you actually stay awake for it, which is cool, especially after you eat a big dinner. But one of the things that stuck in my brain with what he said was, you need to make Hagerstown exciting. that should be the goal of Washington County as a whole. Make Hagerstown exciting. That's where the growth will be, the economic growth will be. It's not going to be along the I-81 corridor. It's going to be in Hagerstown, Maryland. So all I can say is I concur 100%. On a sadder note, I have to, it's with a heavy heart that I inform the council and our citizens that Councilmember Donald Munson has tendered his resignation. And he has done it effective November 10th, 2017. And he thanks myself and the city council and city administrator and outstanding staff for all their hard work and dedication. And I wish him the best and good health and all those things that he deserves. So, having said that, there is now a position open on the Hagerstown City Council, and Donna is going to pass around to you the process that was used on November 14th, 2006, when we talked about this, because someone got elected to the county commissioners. Anyway, we're going to, if you agree to the process, then there was no formal vote taken in 2006. I don't believe there needs to be a formal vote taken this time either, but if we want to follow the same vacancy process, I suggest that's what we do, and we let the city clerk do what she needs to do.
Just want to note one thing. I put minutes from November 14th here. The timeline that was just discussed at that meeting isn't what was actually done. It was just a week earlier. So that's why you have copies of the minutes. And then I actually put what occurred on what date so that you would have that as well.
I agree that we should do it this way.
It made sense in 2006.
Yeah, makes sense now.
Makes sense too, also now, so.
So it would be a process of taking applications and then interviewing and then decision? Okay.
Right.
Are you comfortable with this sort of timeline? I wouldn't be necessarily exact, but.
Well, no, I don't think it would either, but I believe that we should have someone filling that vacancy by the new year.
Sure. I mean, this would have applications
Due by the 27th.
due by the 27th. I have an executive session.
In that time frame, I'm sure that the 27th isn't the exact same.
That actually is.
Exactly.
Yeah, it is exactly the same, yeah.
Yes, it is. Okay, so we'll, and then we,
Makes the determination of qualified applicants.
The city
City-
clerk.
It would be the age, the residency, and then the election board, because it also is a qualified voter to make sure that everyone.
I got ahead of myself. I guess number 4. The choosing of several qualified applicants to then be interviewed in an executive session. I guess there's like a vetting process, so to
Or
speak.
the
It would
four
sound
of
like-
us.
That's what I'm going, I don't know if it's
Yeah,
us
four
or
of us.
administrator or the
No,
staff.
No, council makes
Yeah,
this,
it's
this is on council.
Yeah, 4 of us will make a decision whether we want to interview everybody or
Okay,
anybody.
that's all I was just inquiring on.
And those interviews did occur during an open session that year.
Okay.
And that was on December 5th.
I think there were 16 applications received, and I think the mayor and council interviewed, discussed with 6 of them.
And I'm assuming number 3 is planned to be done in executive session.
Yes, the
Or
initial
4,
review of
4,
applications.
Number 4 says so.
Yeah, that's what I was getting
Yeah,
to
number
before. But you just said the last process was done in open session, though?
Well,
No, the
once,
interviews.
once we chose whether we want to choose 5 or 6 to interview in open session, then that's how we do that in open session.
and then you go back into executive session to discuss the interviews.
Right.
And to
And then
make
we
your
make our
decision.
decision, right.
Yes.
Just like it says right here.
We'll be good at this by the year's done.
Sure we can. We good with the timeline? Are we good with the process? Okay.
Okay, applications will be available tomorrow morning.
Applications will be available tomorrow morning at the city clerk's
They,
office.
hard copies, they have to be picked up in person, or can people go online to do that, or what's the process?
Can we email?
We can email it, and it does say on the application or on a release that it's available online. So I don't have the control over that, but I'll have them that I can email to people.
And you will be putting it out,
Yes.
advertising? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Facebookers out there.
Okay, thank you very much. That's all we have for tonight.
Yeah.